Other than that, I would like to invite y'all to the second half of Global Hip Hop and Social Justice, where we are about to take it global. So you guys read what was the name of the reading? Global Linguistic Flows. And in Global Linguistic Flows, so it's talking about global hip hop, obviously, and the authors are, this is the introduction that you read to an anthology. So it's a book with a bunch of scholarly articles from a lot of different authors. And what do they share in common, aside from the fact that they are studying hip hop around the world, in different countries, different locations around the world? What else do these authors all share in common? Somebody other than Yaya should know. Are they all, for instance, MCs? Is that the impression you're under? Breakdancers, perhaps. Okay, wait a second. Are we all on the same page about what we read? Okay, so what do all the authors, you guys just read the introduction. The introduction gives you an overview, right, of what the themes are throughout the book and what some of the different authors say, right? Is that a fair description of what you read? So, given that you've read that, should be a fairly simple question. What do all these authors that Alim is describing, what do they have in common aside from the fact that they're writing about hip-hop in different places around the world? I said anybody except Yaya. You're the one person who looked just like Yaya. But go ahead and answer, because I don't know. I mean, maybe you've been voted the representative for today. Correct. I was just saying rappers are MCs so that somebody could be like, oh, yeah, well, I guess they're academics. Thank you. Now, more precisely, just like if you are a hip-hop artist, we all assume if you say hip-hop artist, what's the first type of hip-hop artistry we think of? MCing, right? But you could be a hip-hop artist and also be a what? A DJ, a breakdancer. Oh, it's like we know the elements of hip-hop culture. Okay, right. Or what's the fifth element? Or you could be in knowledge production, which would make you Yaya. Or an academic of some sort, a scholar, right? You might be a street scholar, right? That would be an element of hip-hop, which when you say a hip-hop artist, you don't think of a street scholar, do you? Think of a rapper. But the dope rappers are street scholars, aren't they? And the fucking whack-ass rappers are what? They don't really have the fifth element. Okay, so, anyway, Yaya's right. These people are academics. They're not necessarily spitters. They might be, but we didn't get that impression from the intro. More specifically, I did that little digression into they could be, if we're talking about hip-hop artists, we could be more specific about what kind of hip-hop art individuals specialize in. What about academics? We can be more specific about different kinds of academic fields people specialize in. Anybody know if these academics share a particular academic discipline? Linguistics, how about? That seems to be the common denominator. It's almost like you could decipher that from the title. Global Linguistic Flows. Okay. Now that we got through that really difficult question, these are the themes that I want to focus on today, which key concepts in global hip-hop studies, local versus global. And when we're talking about local versus global, there's lots of different ways we could talk about it. In particular, today, I want to talk about it in terms of identity formation, identification, disidentification. I could also put, I said identity. If you guys are writing this down, don't write down what I have there on the slide. Write this down instead. First, I'll read it. I said local versus global, colon, and then under that, what's currently there, which is not what you should write, identification / identity formation. Instead, do it like this, more intelligent, iterative. You can say identity formation as dis / identification. Might be some people in the room rushing for their pens or not fast typers didn't get exactly the sentence there. So for somebody who did get it, say it back for the rest of the class. Put your hand up if you got that sentence the new sentence as I gave it. Michael, did you get it? That's cool. I want you to say it, and then I think you may have got it, but I guarantee not everybody did. So say what the sentence was, and then we'll talk about what it means.
You said identity formation as dis / identification.
Everybody get that? You write it down? Should we repeat it? Let's say repeat it again if you need it repeated. Okay, one more time. You got a microphone.
Identity formation, local versus global, colon, identity formation as dis / identification.
Nice. Okay, so hopefully everybody got it now. Let's talk about what it means. When I say did everybody get it, that's what I meant. Did you write it down? So we can talk about it. So the / often that's like it can indicate a contrast or a binary opposite or a juxtaposition, which is how I use it on slides a lot. And I realize here, that's not what I'm doing here, so that's why I wanted to revise it. So we're talking about identity formation. That's the subtopic of global versus local. So there's local identity formation, there's global identity formation, and there's the ways that identity is formed by juxtaposing or taking pieces from the local and the global, right? And I told you in later classes, maybe in this discussion, a broader topic is just local versus global, when we're talking about what are the key concepts in global hip-hop studies. But the one we're going to focus on today, the subset of these questions related to local versus global, is identity formation. And what kind of identity formation, or what aspect, or what method, or what mode, or what way do people form identities? I've been arguing to you, I've been suggesting to you, I've been trying to teach you, I've been trying to convince you. The way that we create identities is through identifying with and disidentifying with. Right? So that's what the dis / identity means. You're both identifying and disidentifying with something. That's how you create your identity. And you don't do it with one thing unless you are a unidimensional being. If all you think about in the social world is one thing, if the world has two kinds of people in it, if you're one of those thinkers, then you're just identifying, disidentifying with one thing, right? Believe it or not, there's people like that. But nobody in this room, right? Everybody in this room, you have an intersectional identity. because you're identifying and disidentifying with many different things. And your personal identity is the only identity in this room that has the particular intersection of dis/identities that you have. Now, to me, everything I said was like, so that shit was so basic. And it was basic because I said it so many times in this class. But it's not so basic to everybody here because this vocabulary is still something, because some people don't give a fuck and they're not listening. But that's not a majority. But still, this vocabulary is new to a lot of people. Some people have already had exposure. You know who I'm talking about, right? So do you. But not everybody has. So, like, if this stuff is complicated, like, let's talk about it. We can break it down in different terms. That's the point of us having a discussion about it. But there's no point in coming here. I mean, you come here to get your 3 credits. But, like, you could actually learn some shit. And this shit is only relevant. It's not relevant in terms of how well you do on the multiple choice test. It's relevant in how well do you understand it and are therefore able to apply it to your understanding of the social world. You're able to interrogate your own identity, understand what your identity actually is. So this last sentence I said, I think vast majority of people, I could be totally wrong, could be overestimating the complexity. But when I said, your identity, let me just repeat this. Maybe I'll say it in a simpler way. Every one of us, our identity as an individual, our identity is composed of a set of identifications, and each identification is also a disidentification. Every single one of your identifications is simultaneously a disidentification. And you don't only have one, unless, like I said, you define, in this cliche way, the world has 2 kinds of people, right? If the world has more than 2 kinds of people, and you belong in more than one category, then your identity, then you have an intersectional identity. Your identity is composed of the intersection of a whole bunch of identities/disidentities, right? Or dis/identities. And you are the only, what makes you an individual, if you are indeed an individual, which you think you are, I guarantee everybody in this room thinks they're an individual. Haven't done a survey. I could do a top hat question, but it's not worth it. But I guarantee you don't understand, even though you've been saying it all your life, what it is that makes you an individual. You do not understand it. Unless everything that I said so far in this lecture today, if that was all Mickey Mouse shit to you, then yeah, maybe you do understand it. But if it's not, then maybe it's because the vocabulary is new, or it's maybe because you don't understand what your identity is composed of. If you are at the precise intersection as somebody else in the room, the precise intersection along every category of identity/disidentity, then you are identical, then you have the same social identity as somebody else in the room. Now, somebody who's not afraid to say, I don't understand that doesn't make sense to me, explain to me why it doesn't make sense so I could break it down in a simpler way for all the people who are not willing to say that. Is there anybody who doesn't follow what I'm saying? Is there anybody who's willing to? Okay, thank you. I think you should. I think it's been a while since you had the mic. Let's do it. I also think we should have some beats playing, you know?
I don't want to brag, but like I do understand what you're saying, but I feel like there can be a lot of confusion.
It's cool, you can brag this hip hop.
Okay, then I get what you're saying, but I feel like you can have arguments and confusion by like what is the limit or the bar for something to be equal? Because you can argue down to small nuances.
Yeah.
But I think like explaining what the bar is and how like you reach this level that is what makes it equal would help, if that makes sense.
I'm not going to comment on them if that makes sense. I keep the mic. I think I know where you're going. I think let's talk about this. You might be making a really good intervention. I didn't understand it completely. So, what are you talking about in terms of equal, and what bar are you talking about?
Because like you could argue down to very little things, as in like, you know, your thought process is right. You could argue down to that very small level that people are different, but like what's the bar that you're saying that like this means that everyone's equal and overlook these little nuances?
I think I wasn't clear, or you didn't understand what I was saying. Let me check. What I was saying is, as far as social identity, so I was saying everybody in here has a different identity. Everyone's an individual, right? Would you agree everyone's an individual? You gotta say yes for the audience.
Yes.
Everyone's an individual. You would say that, therefore, everybody in the room has a distinct, unique identity that they share with nobody else. Yes? Beginning of the mic, please.
Yes.
Okay. So, I agree with that. I assume, and anybody can tell me if I'm wrong, I assume everybody already assumed that coming into this room today. What I'm not sure everybody knows is that understanding identity, understanding individuality, understanding identity through the concept of intersectionality, right? If we understand intersectionality properly, conceptually, not topically, then we understand that what makes us all individuals is the fact that nobody in the room shares our precise intersection of identities and disidentities. That's what I was saying. And when I was saying equal, what I was saying is it would not be true that each one of us has a unique identity if there were any two people in here who shared the identical intersectional identities and disidentities. It's fair to say I lost you in the last part. Did I lose anybody? Just say yeah. Okay, so the answer is no. So say no. I did not lose anybody. Yeah. Intersections. Not exactly, right? So what I said was, if you can look around the room and you can find somebody who shares all the identities and all the disidentities that you yourself have, then you and that person are the same person. That's what I'm saying. You guys are not different people. That's what I'm saying. There's a hand up over here. Let's get the mic down here. Michael, would you mind passing the mic? Mike, pass the mic, Mike.
So then what are we defining like identity as?
We're defining identity as, from the perspective, from the vantage of the concept of intersectionality, we're defining identity as, remember, the way we make identity, right? Identity formation is the topic that we're talking about. Right now, we're talking about identity formation in the room. And, but our broader topic is around the world. So what we're saying is that, what I'm suggesting to you, you're welcome to disagree, but your opinion is not valid unless you understand what I'm saying. You must understand, then you can determine if you agree or disagree. So what I'm saying is your identity is composed of a series of intersecting identifications and disidentifications. Okay? And I'm saying, this is a radical statement. You've never heard anybody say this. You have no identity. You are not an individual other than through this set of identities and disidentities. That's what I'm saying. And everybody seems to be acting like they understand it, but then when I'm like trying to confirm it, people are not affirming that they do. So, what do you think about what I just said? Was it still unclear? Or is it clear and you disagree?
I feel like if everyone has like their own, like people can share the same identity, but like the way that you think about things and the way that you act, you're still going to be different from other people. There's not going to be someone that has every single thing that's the same about you.
Excuse me. So you said, let's start with the first thing you said. Thank you for doing this. So we can work it out, and then by making it concrete, it's all of a sudden going to be clear. Or I'll die. Trying to make shit clear to you. So you said people can share the same identity. Is that what you said?
Yeah.
The first thing.
Yeah.
Okay. So if people shared the same identity in every sense, right, or along every possible way that we could identify or disidentify as something, people shared all of those things, then they wouldn't be individuals. So let's take an example. How do you racially identify?
White.
Okay. Now, probably, hopefully, by now, everybody understands here. I probably shouldn't say probably. I wish it were the case that, and I hope it is, but I should not assume, that everybody by now understands that to understand yourself as white is to simultaneously understand yourself as what? Not white. You're not white. Right? So if you affirm that you are white, then you are simultaneously affirming that you are not non-white. And in most contexts, most of the time that we are familiar with, if we grew up in the US, our conceptual juxtaposition, the unnamed disidentification, is black. What does it mean to be white? To not be black. Right? You cannot affirm that you are white without simultaneously disaffirming that you are black. And the proof of that is that if you are both white and black, you need to explain that shit. Right? You have to say, oh yeah, I'm white but. Or say, I'm black but. Right? Why is the need for the but? Because it is understood as an identification and disidentification. Now, how do you identify in terms of gender?
Female.
Okay, female. Simultaneously, this is a disidentification with other ways that you could identify in terms of gender. Yeah? Okay. Now, as a white woman, this is an intersectional identity with respect to two axes of identity, or two markers of identity, let's say, right? Gender and race. So with respect only to that intersection, right, which is just an intersection of two identity markers. You could draw a Venn diagram, right? With respect to those two identity markers, there's lots of people in the room who are at that intersection. You're not the only one,
Right.
I imagine, right? But now, that's not the whole extent of the way that you are intersectionally situated. you're also from a certain country in a certain part of the country. Where are you from?
New York.
Okay, New York. You're an East Coaster. You know what that means? That means you're not a what?
Midwesterner.
That's right. Now, if we were on the West Coast, it would not mean that you're not a Midwesterner. If we were in LA right now, and you said, I'm from New York, it would mean you're an East Coaster, which would mean that you're not what?
A West Coaster.
Exactly. Exactly. So why does your East Coast identity mean something different here than it does in LA? Anybody could answer, if you know why, or anybody. It's the context, simple, right? Meaning is contextual, right? It's not that you aren't also not a Midwesterner, but remember when I said, like, if you are affirming that you are white, then you are disaffirming that you are non-white. But what that non-white means is different in different contexts. So in certain contexts, that's obviously black. Certain contexts, that's obviously Indian. In certain contexts, hope this doesn't blow anybody's mind, black and Indian mean the same thing. There are such contexts. In other contexts, they mean exactly the opposite thing. There are some contexts in the Caribbean, there are some countries where if you say you are black, that means you're not Indian. If you say you're Indian, it means you're not black. Most people in this room are like, wait, doesn't make sense. But it does, because that is the dichotomy, that is the pertinent social dichotomy along which rights, opportunities, and resources, justice and injustice, are inequitably distributed. Here, it's white, black. So, still, there's other people from New York. Put your hand up. If you are a white woman from New York, put your hand up. Make some noise. Make some noise. If you're, no, not you. I respect if you would like to identify as a white woman from New York. That's fine. But if you don't, then somebody else make some noise if you're at that intersection. Okay, so nobody, okay, make some noise if you're a white woman. I want to do a social experiment. Make some noise if you're a black woman. Well done, black women. Y'all could teach these white women a thing or two. Okay. Now, I was making a joke, but actually I'm very serious. But okay, so apparently you're the only, of all these white women, you're the only one from New York. So therefore, that is a unique identity for you in this room. I was expecting there to be a couple others and then we'd add a few markers of identity, disidentity. But we don't have to. We just went to 3 and that was a unique identity for you. All right? Let's say we were in a room with all, even me and Dan, identifying as white women from New York. Okay? Then our womanness or our whiteness or our New Yorkness would not be the pertinent aspect of our social identity which is foregrounded. It would be backgrounded. That shit would not matter in this room, right? Then it would be other aspects of our identity that made us unique individuals in that room. But it would still be these different intersections. So that's what I'm saying. So that's the sense in which I'm saying your identity is composed of, we probably shouldn't say innumerable, but as far as our consciousness is concerned, innumerable vectors of identity where we are identifying and disidentifying. And a question for you all is how many of the pertinent aspects of your identity did you choose? And how many were chosen for you? And who chose them? And how many of them, in the category where you didn't choose it, how many of those have you thought about who chose it and why they chose it and why they told you, I'm sorry, bro, you can't be a white woman from New York. Everybody knows you're from Minneapolis. You got to keep it real to your identity, right? Have you thought about that? I'll suggest to you, for the vast majority of all these things we could enumerate, the answer is you haven't thought about it. And I'll suggest to you the only ones that you have thought about are the ones where other people chose this for you. And firstly, you realize that somebody actually chose it as opposed to it's just a physical property of the universe and your body. Assuming you're past that, you still probably didn't think about, why I gotta be that, bro? Why? Why can't I be from New York? What if I go to New York and I live there for 6 months? Then can I be from New York? Right? What is the criteria? Who sets the criteria, right? You've only thought about that if you didn't like, right? If you weren't happy with the way certain axes of identity, certain vector markers of identity are imposed on you, right? Or what people say, or like people say, you are from Minneapolis, therefore you should fill in the blank, right? You may have had no problem all your life with people saying you're from Minneapolis until they started to phrase it like that. You are from Minneapolis. I'm sorry, picking on you, stand over there like, oh, this guy. Picking on this. I'm always picking on this guy. I know, I should pick on you. Oh, this guy, okay. Let's pick on this guy. Who got the microphone? This guy's a troublemaker. Watch out for him, Dan.
Thanks. So I guess I had questions about like the difference between like more like contingent identity and like necessary identity, but not essentialism, because it's like I was born in Chicago, but I wouldn't say that's integral to like if I was born anywhere else as a contingent truth, I don't think that would take away my identity per se. But then there's other identities that I think like, you know, me just existing, like I think that's necessary for me to have an identity. So I don't know, I'm sort of confused with that.
I mean, the latter part shouldn't be confusing. In order for you to exist, you must have an identity, right?
Yeah.
That seems pretty tautological. But to make, I doubt everybody is familiar with the terms that you're using right now. So put each of those in a category. So say, what are you contrasting? Contingent identity versus necessary identity?
So it's like necessary is like what are the identities you have that like without them you wouldn't be you or you wouldn't exist or something versus
No, hold on. I think that was too much conflation right there.
Okay.
I'm suggesting first, you said, say just the first clause you said. Which aspect of identity would you not be you? Is that the first thing you said?
Yeah, that's like necessary.
So I'm saying anything about you, if it were not true, then you would be somebody else. You wouldn't be who you are with respect to that aspect of your identity. But now your point is which one matters?
Yeah.
Isn't it the case that some don't matter or some matter more than others? So the answer is what we've been discussing. In the different social contexts that you're in life, right now, there's a particular aspect of your identity that is foregrounded in this conversation, which if we were hanging out somewhere else, it wouldn't necessarily be foregrounded. It might. But if we were hanging out 20 years from now, it definitely wouldn't be foregrounded. And that's your identity as a student, right? That's foregrounded in this exchange because of the social situation that we're in. Right? Doesn't mean that the other things don't make up who you are. It means those other things are not the relevant thing until such time as they are the axes of identity where what's happening? Privilege is being bestowed, status is being bestowed, people are told, if you're this, you should behave like this, right? That's when it matters, right? So nothing is essential to the moment other than what matters in the social exchange. And how do we determine what matters is largely through culture. Culture is what? The making of meaning, an application of it to cultural entities. I know these are all funny words, but we have them on slides, right? Okay, let's keep going here. So culture and cultural appropriation in global context. We've talked about culture. We've defined it. Hopefully you know the definition as I've given it. You know that it is composed of what I'm calling cultural entities. If you read sociology or do a culture of sociology or cultural studies or sociology of culture, which, believe it or not, are different bodies of literature because academics like to divide up, in these different groups, intersectional identities, right? They're different things. But in that literature, you might hear about cultural objects. I'm saying identities, if you recall, because I'd rather not be so objectifying, especially because sometimes we're talking about things. We're talking about chairs, talking about the room, right? We could talk about the cultural meaning of this kind of a room, the architectural structure of this room has material properties, but it also has cultural meaning. And we understand the meaning of this room relative to our social situation, which is in this university student-professor game that we're playing right now, which some of you are enjoying and others are not. I'm usually so optimistic. Why am I making all these negative statements? Like suggesting not everybody loves my class. Fucking, this is the shit right here. We should go for another 2 hours. I was going to ask you to go to the next slide, but I have the slides right here. So culture and cultural appropriation. So we have our definition of culture. We know culture is composed of cultural entities. You add up all these entities, then we can talk about this particular culture. Right? Is one way that we could break it down. And then what we discussed before is I'm suggesting to you, which even if you know how to answer these questions on a multiple choice test, you don't understand what I'm trying to teach you about culture and cultural appropriation unless you can apply it. And the only way you learn to apply it is by practicing. So what I've been trying to tell you in the first half of the course, when we weren't taking it global, is the way you should engage in discussions, and you should, by the way. There's some people who hear cultural appropriation, and what do? They try to get out of the conversation fast as they can. I hope y'all don't behave like that. I would like you to get into the conversation, and here's why. Because people say a lot of bullshit in those conversations, and I would like you to get rid of some of that bullshit using the intellectual ammunition that I'm proposing you fire. And the way you do that is by understanding that culture is creating shared meaning. And whenever we are creating a particular meaning, whenever we're proposing a particular meaning, right, we are juxtaposing it to another possible meaning that we are disagreeing with. If we're Midwesterners, we might disagree with the fact that we're ever disagreeing with anything. But if you did so, you'd be disagreeing. So, ha-ha. So if all our identities, if I identify with something or as something, if I say I'm an East Coaster, right? I don't have to say I'm an East. I could lie to your point about being from Chicago. You can just not say you're from Chicago, right? You don't have that je ne sais quoi that you walk in a room and people are like, I don't give a fuck what he says. This is a Chicago moment, right? Some of us do have aspects of our identity like that. Don't matter what we say. But you could say, I'm not from Chicago. I feel like people would believe you. Right? It's not because you would muster greater intellectual evidence. Because people are just doing this, throwing people into boxes based on how they identify and disidentify. Right? But so you choose to say you're from Chicago. You choose to not see it as a problem for the way people identify you if they do identify you that way. So that's an identification. So in that sense, that identity is imposed upon you, but you also appropriate it. Right? You could deny it. You could say, I don't want to be thought of that way. I'm not from Chicago. You could, maybe you know the native territory that whatever part of Chicago or all of Chicago is smack dab on top of. And you might want to say, this is how I identify. And then people say, you're not from that tribe. You say, it doesn't matter. This is where I was born. Why the fuck you got to say I'm from Chicago? I'm from whatever. I'm Ho Chunk. Right? Ho Chunk. You can say that. You represent for Ho Chunk instead of Madison. Right? So, but by not doing that, by saying, if you say I'm from Madison, right, you're not saying I'm from Ho Chunk land. Unless you have a little plaque. Say, I'm from Madison. Oh, yeah. When somebody asks. Right? But you're identifying. So you are appropriating the Madison identity or the Chicago identity. Doesn't matter that you are from Chicago. Right? Because are from could be interpreted in so many different ways. All kinds of ways in which I can say, no, I'm not from there. And you say, yeah, you are from there. And I say, well, I don't think there is called that. Simple. But not. Right? So you're appropriating. So everything, so I'm telling you, there's no culture that you have that isn't appropriated. All aspects of culture, all aspects of your cultural identity, you have appropriated. Unless you invented them yourself. Just like your opinions, right? All your opinions, you invented all of your opinions yourself. Unless you appropriated them from YouTube or your favorite news, what do they call it? Infotainment, right? Which includes CNN or MSNBC or that other one which will remain nameless. Right? You're appropriating things. And the way you make things your own is not by not appropriating them, but by combining things in unique ways. Right? The thing where Africa Bambaataa says, look, it's not this record or that record which is hip hop. Doesn't mean I have to sample from this kind of music and not that kind of music. He says, what I do with it, how I take it and how I use it is what makes it hip hop. Right? It's the knowledge, it's the perspective with which I come from, it's the aims with which I re-identify, redefine all these different cultural entities, tropes, styles, phrases, movements, all these things, how I put them together that one, make them hip-hop, and two, make my identity uniquely my identity, not yours. Why are you trying to, That's how I make it. So then, if everybody is appropriating all the time and you can't have an identity without appropriation, then the question becomes not is it or is it not cultural appropriation, it's which appropriations are appropriate, which are not. Another way to say it, which appropriations are just and which are not just. And how do we determine just and not just? We just ask people if their feelings were hurt. Oh, that's the liberal perspective. Sorry. I mean, what we do is we look at how this affects the distribution of rights, opportunities, and resources, and if it disproportionately does so in favor of a group and oppresses another, then that shit is oppressive, and it's cultural appropriation in the pejorative sense. Now, would you be surprised if I told you this also happens with respect to global hip-hop culture and global culture as well, it's not just some chick wearing some braids some way in America, and everything is all about America. Actually, it's all over the world. So, when I was talking to you guys about your choices in terms of your identity, everybody in this room has made some choices with respect to their identity, and there are other choices about your identity that were made by people other than you. That applies to every single person in this room. I told you we're all individuals, but not with respect to that point. Nobody in here chose every aspect. Nobody in here steadfastly enumerated all the things that I said were virtually enumerable, and they decided on each one, lining them up with their core values. If you did, congratulations. Well done. But that's the opportunity that you have anytime. We can't think of all these things. But when somebody says to you, bro, that shit is racist, here's an opportunity for you not to be like, no, because. Bro, that shit was sexist. Bro, this is distracting. Venn diagrams, right? Insofar as some of these, not all of these, right? Some of these are markers of identity that, along which axes of injustice are exercised, exist, right? Along which privilege and disadvantage are bestowed in proportion to which identity you are. Right? Insofar as that applies to any aspect of your identity, I suggest to you, if you're concerned with social justice, it's incumbent upon you to critically think about that and to critically determine and re-examine the different social situations that you're in. Because of this. That's not true for anybody. It might be true that you are oppressed everywhere you've been because of that one thing. But even if that's true, that thing intersects with your identity, with other aspects of your identity in different ways in different places. So you are intersectionally oppressed in different ways. Sometimes the weight is lighter because of other aspects. Okay, let's move on. So the question that I try to ask, and I'm surprised when people have a hard time answering this, is to you, what aspect of your identity matters most to you? Which is the one that you personally foreground when you think of yourself? Jeff, what is it for you? Humanitarian. I feel like that's not one of these identities that people imposed upon you. You didn't grow, I don't know, maybe your parents are like, listen, Jeff, all these people are going to say you're from Chicago, but what I want you to know, you are a humanitarian. Right? I don't know, it could be. But all of us have different things. I'd like to go around the room, but, these conversations, for some reason, they're not as straightforward as you would imagine. Yeah, what about you? Bam. Okay, dope. Same response. Dan, what about you?
Oh, I just work here.
Worker. See, even with a Midwest answer, it was still an answer. You're a worker, meaning you're not one of these students. Meaning you don't have to do what these students have to do. Exactly, but, you know, apparently your employer seems to want to test you in other ways.
Yeah, I guess so.
So, can't escape it. Okay, all right, so the point is that your identity is composed of all these different things, right? So artist, humanitarian, MC, hip-hopper, these are things we chose for ourselves, right? But there's all kinds of aspects, Chicagoan, I don't know if that's caused a lot of problems for you in your life, probably not. But there's some things that are imposed upon us, right? So what do we do when shit is imposed upon us that we don't like? I don't know. I would like to know, honestly, maybe now this is, I said the other thing, I could do a survey. Maybe like an anonymous survey. This would be an interesting question. I wonder if everybody in the room has some aspect of their identity. Maybe I'll ask this later as a top hat question. Some aspect of their identity that was imposed upon them and that they disagree with, that they didn't like. And therefore they try to like do something clever, redefine themselves using some cultural materials. I don't know if that's everybody. I'm sure that's many people. I'd be interested to know if it's everybody. But generally it's what we do, right? Whether you're conscious or not, you are identifying with these different things. This is true in the US. If you're a real American, right? Nobody here who grew up being told, not only are you a Chicagoan, you're American, right? Anybody who grew up that way, probably didn't bother you, didn't come into your mind, like, what does that mean? Does that mean I'm not something else? Right? That didn't occur to you until somebody said to you, you are American, therefore you must, you're still fine with it. Until the you must was something you didn't want to do. Then you're like, wait a second. Do I have to? Or can I redefine what it is to be American? Or do I have to be American? And if it's American, you probably didn't think about, come on, do I have to? Dad? If your primary identity, the way you think about yourself, is as a patriot. Hands up, everybody who's a patriot. Come on. Hands up. Can I get an amen? Look, people are not patriots here. If you're a patriot, your hand would be all the motherfucking way up in the sky. Jackson, come on. You can't help me out here? You're not a patriot? You guys right here. You guys. Are you guys patriots or not? Your hand is like up like this. Like you're half a patriot? Exactly. Oh, it's because it's not clear. Right, because since we're talking about, right, the foregrounded, I'm sorry. It is a university, makes perfect sense. So how many of your primary markers of identity did you choose, right? How many have you analyzed? All right. In this reading, I got a whole bunch of slides. I don't want to do the slides. I want to just talk with you guys after we play a video. But I would just want to open up to conversation for the last little bit. So I'm going to say like one or two more things about the reading, and then the rest is like do the reading. But in the introduction, in this reading that you did, they're talking all about language, and I just want you to remember what I told you about when we watched the Noam Chomsky clip. Everything that they're saying about language here, which I put up on the slide, I put a bunch of quotes here, and throughout the reading, you could think about that more broadly in terms of culture. All this stuff applies to language, right? So linguistic resources, you could think broadly in terms of cultural resources. What linguistic resources do you manipulate, reappropriate, and sometimes recreate in order to fashion yourselves as members of whatever it is you claim to be a member of? Let me make this point while we're right here. Even those categories, this is a subtlety you might not realize. even those so you know that some of these, the categories that you guys mentioned, humanitarian artists, we're all aware that in order to be those things, you got to perform in a certain way, right? But there's lots of identities, and if you don't, people will be like, "Are you really an artist? Yo, that sucks. What did you? Come on now, you're an artist, right? Or you're an artist. Show me something. I'm a writer. Show me something. It's coming. Keep saying that. People are like, I don't know. I don't know if you're a writer. So it's obvious to us. Some of these things is obvious that you have to perform a certain way for people to take you seriously as that thing. But what you probably don't realize, again, until you have that experience I was talking about, is that even these things that people just assume of you, these categories people just give you, you don't even have to prove that you're an artist. You don't even got to prove that you're an MC, right? You do have to prove if you're an MC. But there's other things that people just assume. You walk in the room, they're like, you're that. And you're like, no, let me prove you. I'm a white guy, right? If they're like, no, we believe you, bro. You don't got to show us. We know, right? Some things people just accept you as. But even those things, actually, people have expectations that you are going to perform that shit in a particular way. And when you don't want to, that's when you realize that this shit ain't free. This ain't free. Some people know what I'm talking about. Right? None of this shit that you get for free, even your privilege, this shit ain't free. You must behave to get that privilege. You must stay in line. And if you don't, people are going to let you know that you're out of line. They're going to say you're not a real American. Or you're not a real man. You're not a real MC. Your rhymes suck, which might be true. Or maybe it isn't true. Maybe being an MC is not really about rhymes and wild, You might want to argue that. So, what linguistic resources do you manipulate, reappropriate, and recreate in order to fashion or refashion yourselves as whatever you want to be? So people are saying to you, you're not this, or you must do this. And then you're like, okay, some of these things I can't change, but some of these things, if I dress a certain way, if I talk a certain way, if I perform a certain way, if I speak a certain way, everybody's going to think I'm a rapper. And then I could sell all these records in Canada, become one of the top-selling artists from Canada, until Aubrey comes along and fucking, you guys know what Aubrey did, right? Made my sales look like a joke. I used to be, but you know what? I didn't get upset about it. You know what I did? I was like, yo, Canadian rapper, that sounds like I could just say, I'm a professor. And then I manipulated those linguistic cultural resources, and that's called a hustle. Something we do in hip-hop. I invented this shit. That's some, cultural appropriation, by the way. And it's a cultural appropriation I did by taking shit from all over. And taking shit that people wouldn't expect from me given where I came from. Given where I was intersectionally situated to start, I put myself in a different intersectional situation. Not with less contradictions. Some of the contradictions I resolved, some of them I created new ones. Some of them we've already talked about in this class, right? But in each of these situations, I have to perform a certain way, right? And if I don't perform a certain way or a certain kind of thing, then people are like, yeah, but are you really? So, I'm good at manipulating linguistic resources. That's how I manage to, run this hustle I just told you about. So, what linguistic resources are you using to get you where you are? And how does that affect other people? Or communities, or groups, right? How many people didn't like, I'm surprised with the Patriot thing. I'm surprised people didn't put their, some people. That's weird to me. I thought like we could all, I didn't think we could all get along. I wasn't gonna say it. But I thought like there would be a lot of us who could like agree on that. How many people, I gotta think of a way I could actually get people to answer these questions. I suppose, but like, serious, okay. How many people identify as Midwesterners? Okay, good. Look at that. Look at that. Okay, so, bam. Midwest. Okay, how many people are not Midwesterners? Oh, we got to do a class on this. I should have figured this out a few minutes ago. Okay, now, somebody who could do this concisely, and we'll talk a little bit more about this later, but somebody who could say this concisely, what is the difference beyond like somebody was born here, somebody was born there? What's the difference between a Midwesterner and an East Coaster? Y'all threw your hands up, so somebody needs to be able, yeah. Yeah. Okay, just give me a couple words about it. Like details.
Ope is a word.
Oh.
No, like Midwestern, like the way people talk is different. Like, I guess you could say phrases they use.
Yeah, sure.
Or food.
So there's different phrases that are common, right? And these are cultural entities, right? They're cultural memes. They're linguistic resources which identify you in one community or another. What else? Do Midwesterners like East Coasters?
I don't know. I would say generally.
Generally. Is there anything they don't like about East Coasters?
I would say
Generally.
snobbish.
Huh?
Like viewed as more snobby, I could say.
Okay. All right.
I don't know.
So, one aspect which differentiates Midwesterners, we're not going to do a lot of this. I'm just trying to make a point. So let's just we're just going to pick one thing. So you said snobby. Would people agree that, let me say the statement and we see if people who are Midwesterners, you agree or disagree. Would you agree that one distinction generally, right? We're not talking about every single person. Generally speaking, Midwesterners, if you're part of Midwestern culture, you identify as a Midwesterner, you threw your hand up, you didn't want to say you're a patriot. Y'all motherfuckers ain't patriots, but you're Midwesterners. Maybe that's why you don't want to say you're a patriot. It might be related. So one of the ways in which you understand your culture as different is that you think of like East Coasters as generally snobbier than Midwesterners. Everybody agree? Yep. Yeah. Yeah. No, I think you're right. Anybody tell me? Okay, and there's lots of other things, right? We could name other things. Here's one example, right? So you have these linguistic resources that you perform, and you have these ways of thinking about this other identity, right? Isn't it funny? Like the word, think about this. Midwestern. The identity, when you say I'm a Midwesterner, the culture that you are contrasting yourself to is East Coast. Geographically, that's not logical, right? But it's cultural meaning, right? The meaning is cultural, it's not geographic. Sounds like a geographic term, Midwest. It's not. It's a cultural term. It's a cultural term which is an identity which is simultaneously a disidentity which intersects with lots of other identities, right? So you can use those linguistic resources as a Midwesterner to your advantage, right? And you do if you're a Midwesterner, right? Unless you're a dumb Midwesterner. But if you're a smart Midwesterner, you use your linguistic resources to your advantage to get the things you want. To identify with people and be like, yeah, we're not, he's East Coaster, yeah, they're so snobby, by the way, so you're going to sign my, give me this job? Whatever, right? You use it as a linguistic resource to identify with people and disidentify with other people in order to create your identity, in order to get yourself rights, opportunities, and resources. Do you agree?
I mean, I agree that you can use those things
Okay.
like to your advantage. I don't know if it's like the entirety of like what you can use to your advantage. Like, I would say I agree, like generally.
Yeah, I'm not saying this is the only way you get shit. If anybody in this room, only way you ever got anything in your life was by mobilizing your Midwestern identity, fuck, you have done a good job. Because I don't think you'd be alive. Definitely wouldn't be in the university. Now, your Midwestern identity helps you be in this university. You know, that's money right there, straight up. But it's not the only thing you're mobilizing. So, anyway, what I want to point out, we're going to talk a lot about, so the examples that I wanted to highlight, which it's better that I didn't. We could do some other shit. Of course, all of this applies to race. This all applies to gender. This all applies to the general categories that, people topically list off when they talk about intersectionality, social justice. We all know that if you try to talk about hip hop and you're trying to avoid talking about race, you're trying to fool somebody. And there are people who try to do that. There are people who try to say it's got nothing to do with race. That's misappropriation. One way or the other, if you are identifying as hip hop or with hip hop, if you're mobilizing hip hop as a cultural resource, you are engaging with racial discourse. When we were talking about when is it appropriate for a white person to engage, to mobilize, to be part of, a lot of people, when they watched that video I showed, Lord Jamar saying, look, we're not saying you can't come over. You just understand, hip-hop is a house black people built. Don't come over here and start rearranging all the furniture. At least not without asking. Maybe we would like you to move it, but at least have some respect. And it's amazing how many people here, watch that video and say, he's saying white people can't participate. He's saying white people can't. No, he didn't say, he said you come on over. Just don't fuck up the whole house. Don't kill nobody's mom, Eminem. Because you can't, if you get into this and you ignore what we did it for, then you are writing your script over top of our script, which is not adding on. It's not helping us develop. It's not and also. It's not, fuck your shit, this is our shit. Like Azalea Banks was saying. So, in so much of the literature, I'm going to end on this point. So much of the literature, which we'll be reading some of, constructs global hip hop as if the United States is not in the world. As if the globe is just whatever is not the United States. We'll talk about why that is. But when we talk about American music, what is American music? When we talk about blackness, what is blackness relative to America? A lot of people think that to be black racially is limited to the United States. But that's not how we think about it in terms of hip hop. In hip hop, very often we're constructing ourselves as global citizens. Which this is a very dope song, Global Citizen, by this guy, Professor D. If I have more time, I'd spit for you a verse. But rather than that, I'm going to play you something from one of my professors and a whole bunch of other people who are doing this hip-hop thing, appropriating it in